Well, it is a pleasure and an honor to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity. And I appreciate the intro. Thank you. Better. Progress. Excellence. So, two objectives. First was a personal objective to get me out of class for a week, so thank you very much, sir, for that opportunity. The second objective of this brief is a little bit of a Bismarck kind of moment in the sense of trying to learn from our experience. Some of those things are hopefully positives, and some of those things are hopefully things that in the future our NATO partners can avoid so that you don't make the same mistakes we did. So here we go. First thing is a moment of philosophy. So you'll see a new acronym that I'm going to offer you called Remotely Piloted Aircraft. So Marianne, where are you? Please add that to your slide of acronyms. There's one more out there you need to think about. This has become near and dear to our philosophical hearts in the United States Air Force because every time someone says drone on CNN, I shake a little bit. And the reason why is, what is a drone? A drone is well, there's a drone. It's designed to go out autonomously, do its thing, not think, follow orders, come back, report, go out and do it again. That's it. Very much an Autobot. But I'm not so interested in drones. The United States Air Force earned the moniker drones. We did. The way we employed these systems, the way we kept them in a stovepipe, kept them in a box, and we're told to go out and stare at that until you're told otherwise, and then come home. And accepting that was very much a drone mentality, so we've earned it. But we're working very hard, especially at the weapons school, and I'll tell you why at the weapons school is a unique experience for us, to change that paradigm. We don't want to be drone operators, we want to be RPA pilots, remotely piloted aircraft. And that's a very important distinction, because you need to understand that these airplanes don't do a thing unless I tell it to do it. Nothing. It doesn't even come home right unless I tell it to come home right, unlike a drone. So in some ways, it's much dumber than a drone. And in other ways, it's much more dynamic, much more a force enabler, much more capable when integrated properly with a pilot in the loop. So I'm going to talk to you from a pilot's perspective about remotely piloted aircraft, because that I'm very much interested in talking about. So from there, here's what we're going to go through. We're going to real quick blaze through where are we today, because that's not nearly as compelling as what we've learned. And then a little, very quick, about where we're going. And that should pretty much take up most of my time and some of the Brits' time, but that's okay, because I've taught him everything he knows. He's got nothing more to add. We go way back, so I can say that. What I am going to talk to you about is the Air Force systems. So in the United States, we've broken these things down so we can kind of start defining what's what. And tiers 1 through 3 are the low-flying stuff, the organic stuff, if you will, the stuff that's really designed to support the maneuver units that live with the Army and the Marine Corps. Most of that immediate force protection kind of material is what we call Tier 3 or lower, and that also equates to aircraft capability. So the bigger, the faster, the heavier, the more capable, those get up into the Tier 4 and 5, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about. Not so much Ravens and Shadows, okay? Army stuff, I'm here to talk to you about the high flyers, the C-2 Strike ISR platforms of the future. Okay, and I fuse those three terms on purpose, and I'll tell you why as we go along. Beyond line of sight operations, that's our how we do business. As most of you know, I sit in Nevada, yes, Las Vegas. It's not nearly as glamorous as you might think, but the airplane, of course, is not in Nevada. It is, you name it. So as long as I have what's called a launch and recovery element, or those 10 overseas launch and recovery sites, which is what we currently are deploying now, one of which was in Italy to support Libya, some of you are familiar. As long as I have a launch and recovery site within a couple hundred miles of where I want to do business, then I can take that airplane from Nevada and I can employ it. And it's not, Nevada is kind of the poster child. We're in probably about 11 or 12 separate locations now, not just Nevada. So we've kind of dispersed a little bit. We're working on that too. Physically in the States, but mentally in combat. What's that all about? You get up in the morning, and it's been alluded to already, you drive up 30 minutes to Creech. If anybody made it in 20 minutes, whoever said that yesterday, that guy was speeding. So it's about a 30-minute drive up to Creech. When you get to Creech, we've kind of instilled a discipline amongst our aircrew. When you walk in the door of your squadron, you're no longer in Nevada. You need to make a mental switch that you're in combat, and that's tough to do. It takes a little while for our crews to realize that, to internalize that, to realize that this is not a video game. What's on the other end of that, I think I just went silent. I've never been accused of needing a microphone. What's on the other end of that stick and throttle that you're working is a real live airplane with real live weapons and real live lasers, and more importantly than any of that is there's real live guys on the ground that need your help. And they need to know that when they walk through the door. So being able to make that switch is a challenge. It's a different stress. It's not like being mortared or shot at by SAMs, but it's a different kind of stress. The largest growth area is at the tactical level, but there's operational and strategic effects happening. So when this airplane can affect a target at the tactical level, that does not mean it was simply a tactical level kind of engagement. There is an ability to bring in all of your operational and strategic level organizations to the tip of the spear through this airplane. I'm going to talk about that in terms of a lesson learned. Over 1 million combat hours in the Predator alone. That's not counting the RQ-170, the Wraith, right? And that's not counting the MQ-9, which is becoming a big growth industry for us. That's just the Predator. It's the largest weapon system in the Air Force. Wow. In terms of flight hours, and very soon in terms of manning, the largest weapon system in the Air Force. Think about that for a second. The next time you come to Red Flag, the next time you go to TLP, you're going to see F-16s and A-10s and all that fun stuff. What you won't see is the largest weapon system in the Air Force, because we're having a very hard time divesting this for training purposes. But you need to realize that when you get to Libya next time, wherever that may be, you're going to be bumping in, hopefully not physically, bumping into these things. Okay? They're out there and there's a lot of them. And to think that the United States Air Force's largest weapon system is this tells you a little bit about how our DNA is changing in the Air Force, and for good and for bad in some cases. All right. Quick sound bites. We're flying 57 24/7 caps right now, mix of 1s and 9s, mostly 1s, as you can see by the inventory, moving to 9 as time goes by. We cannot crash the MQ-1s fast enough, but that is the replacement plan. As we crash them, we replace them in an MQ-9, but that is the future. All MQ-9 fleet, which is unfortunate and fortunate. MQ-9 does some things better, does some things worse too, so it depends on what you really want to do, but that's what the decision we've made. You've all seen this act, maybe, maybe not. This is the beyond line of sight architecture. So what do I see when I look at this? Well, we're mostly familiar with this end. This is that tactical end I'm talking about. That's where the airplane is, supporting whomever, airborne platforms, ground commander, whatever the case may be. He is enabled by a launch and recovery element, throws it in the air. Guys in Nevada see it, grab it, fly the mission. 20 hours later, bring it home, they land it. Nothing lands by itself right now, by the way. That would be nice, but that's not reality. So, through this bridge of both satellite communications and fiber, we get the signal back to the United States. Once it comes into the main hub, it gets distributed. Where you see green is part of the enterprise, but it's not part of command and control. That is the intelligence network, our national intelligence apparatus, that through these green lines is tied into this mission. That's very important in a moment. We'll talk about that. Where you see black lines is where we're actually flying stick and throttle kind of stuff. Okay? What else do I see on this slide? Vulnerabilities, right? So we've gotten very accustomed to going up against low-threat environments with not necessarily the most tech-savvy enemy. But what happens when, say, maybe you pivot towards Asia? Now how vulnerable are these lines of communication? Very. So that's something we are very cognizant of and working hard to figure out how do we make our magic happen in the future. It's a vulnerability that we need to think about. All right, I love this one. This is great. So this is the, everybody look at me, look how awesome I am, look at all the hours the United States Air Force has flown, right? You impressed? You're supposed to be impressed. Okay. So through the years, I don't have 12 for you yet, but as we've increased, a lot of hours, a lot of missions supported in the unmanned program. What else do you see? So you mean to tell me you've flown almost 250,000 hours, and this year we'll certainly eclipse that, and you supported 28,000 targets. So a little bit of a delta? What are you doing with all these hours? So one of the things I'll leave you with is flying a lot of RPA hours and filling that insatiable need for I need to see what's happening, all right, in our command and control nodes does not necessarily equate to effectiveness. So performance, this is a measure of performance. Real good. We put a lot of airplanes went up and most of them came back, right? But how much did we affect? That's another story entirely, and we stink at measuring it. So I'll tell you that when you get into the business of doing pattern of life, which is a lot of what we do, constant stare and see who's coming and going and build a high fidelity situational awareness picture of your enemy, that takes a lot of hours, but it doesn't necessarily always equate to effectiveness. And it never ends. How do I know when I've got enough information? How do I lower the risk bar enough to operate and execute? Where is that threshold? That's a commander's decision that needs to be made. And in the age of full motion video, it's easier and easier to kick that can down the road and go, I just need one more day. And before you know it, the DNA of your Air Force has changed, and all you know how to do is put up more and more full motion video hours. I caution you against that because there's a tremendous amount of national treasure in that number that I don't know if we can necessarily equate to effectiveness. And that's something that we're going to continue to struggle with, and as we come into an operational pause, that is something we definitely need to get our arms around in the United States Air Force. Lessons learned, first one. In many ways, this is not a revolution in military affairs. In many ways, an unmanned airplane is just an airplane. It just doesn't have a man in it. When I was flying an F-16, you know what? I was a voting member. I pushed the aileron right, and the computer said, maybe, sure, I'll give you some aileron right. Let's go that way now. In the MQ-9, I say aileron right, and the signal goes 7,000 miles and says, okay, I'll give you aileron right. So, in a lot of ways, so the F-16 guys are about to throw rotten tomatoes at me. It's the only difference is my cockpit, the seat to the actuator is separated by 7,000 miles in a lot of ways. And the way we've employed it and the way we try to instill our initial disciplines, both in our crew training, in our mentalities, in how we develop tactics, has been just that. How do we employ this airplane so it looks like every other airplane we've got? It's just that we save some things. We lower risk. We do some of the things with endurance that we can do with unmanned airplanes. So in a lot of ways, it's an airplane. But what we failed to do is think about the other things that come along with an airplane. For example, our FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, hates me. They hate this airplane. It took one base in New Mexico. It was 1.5 miles to the airspace, from the pattern to the airspace. And for 1.5 years, all they could do was launch to the pattern. 3,000 feet, come back down. Cannot leave the pattern because they couldn't get clearance to go 1.5 miles. Took us 1.5 years to get that permission. It is very difficult to move certain mountains of philosophy and entrenchment to understand that, yes, it's true, I cannot do see and avoid much, okay? But there's other things that we can work out, that we can get to the airspace and start training. So this has been very much one of the things that's restricted us quite a bit. It's susceptible to poor weather, but that's getting better, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. It's getting better. Diverting, though, in order for me to divert, I need certain infrastructure at that airfield. I can't just go somewhere and land. I need antennas, I need cockpits, I need people on the ground there. I cannot just take a pilot and send him to another airstrip because that's where he needs to go for weather. It has to be designed for RPA. It's flown by pilots and train them appropriately. So if I want a drone, that's easy. I can get a monkey to move the stick and throttle. But if I want a living, breathing, decision-making mission commander, I need to train him appropriately. And we did not do that. In the United States Air Force, our promotion rate at Creech, the hub of all this, is 47%. Whereas the rest of the Air Force is up on 75%. What does that mean? It means that the Air Force sent its miscreants to the RPA community, okay? Here I am. But a lot of times we use it as a penal colony. Like, if you can't get it done in a manned airplane, we're going to send you out there. Well, what we found out is, much to our chagrin, that this became the cat's meow to the ground commander. All of a sudden, in the war we were fighting, this is what he wanted more than anything else. And who's running it? Boy, we sent the wrong guys out there. So now we have a steady stream of commanders coming from outside the community to lead the program who don't have a lot of credibility because they didn't grow up in the trenches. Of the 24 squadrons we have, 2 are being commanded by guys who actually flown the night shift and flew the trenches. All right? So we got a lot of growing up to do because we didn't treat it like an airplane and lead it appropriately. And beware of the temptation to surge. So you got this capability, and you've got your training line out, you're doing some good work because you're doing some training, but you got an operational mission going out too. We haven't had I think we had 8 hours in 2011 of post-initial qualification training. 8 hours. You saw how many hours we're flying. 8 were spent making guys better once they were initially qualified. The only place that we do post-initial training is at the weapons school, which is why I'm talking to you from a weapons school perspective, because it's the only place where we're allowed to actually do something other than qualification and combat. That has been bad for the growth of RPA in the U.S. Air Force. Very bad. Why? Because it's so easy to take that training asset and go, you know what, I know you're supposed to train today, Air Force, but we really got an emergency. Can you just let me have your training line today? It's an emergency. It's so easy. All you got to do is retype an IP address and bingo, you're flying combat. Well, where's the line then? Where's the red line that says at some point I have to organize, train, and equip, and I cannot give you everything all the time? Very difficult decision for leaders to make because you have to look a guy in the face who has a real-world need and tell him no. It's hard to do. It makes it harder by RPA. Where are our pilots coming from? Well, I'm here. I am a transplant that showed up about here. So I was ripped out of my beautiful F-16, I volunteered. But we had a few pilot training guys, they've gone away. So there's a huge sigh of relief at the United States Air Force Academy is this thing. But the transplants are going away too. We stood up a whole new career field just to fly unmanned airplanes. They're unmanned only pilots. They're called 18Xers, that's their code. And they get about 6 months of training and then they're on the line in Creech, flying combat. 6 months. Combat. No training after they get qualified, remember that. So guess what? I have a huge problem out here. The good news is they're tremendously motivated. So I think there's hope once we get some training in their hands. Just like any wingman, give me enough training, I can make something out of them. But it's going to take time to bring this along. Remember the DNA of the Air Force I talked to you about. Think about how many guys it takes, thousands, to do this. Those are the guys going to be standing around the red flag mission table with you all someday. Keep that in mind, where they're coming from and how the DNA is changing. All right, faster and funnier. Here's the second lesson learned. This airplane is not just an airplane. I just told you treat it like an airplane for organized, train, and equip. Yes, I'm not contradicting myself. I know you're watching. But when you get it over the top of the target, it's more than just an airplane. Yes, it's providing you great situational awareness. Yes, you're getting full motion video, and that's fantastic in the operations centers around the country. What it is more, though, is a portal to things that at the tactical end you never had access to before. Okay? For example, this ground force commander is interested in this target, but what he doesn't know is that through this bridge that we've already talked about, there might be somebody in the intelligence network somewhere that understands something about that target that no one else does. And before, he would read about it a week later in a mission report and say, man, I wish I could have effected that strike. Today, he sends a message to me in chat. I see it in the cockpit. I declassify it, and I key the radio, and I tell the ground force commander right then and there, and he can bring the full weight of a national apparatus to the pointy end of decision making. That is very powerful in some cases. It is very distracting in others. So it's very important to keep an eye on which one's which and sift through that and figure out what the ground force commander really needs to know. Does a drone operator do that? An RPA pilot does that. A mission commander does that. And that's who I'm training in our Air Force. This next video is an example of, I'm going to let you watch it. I'm going to talk to it as it's rolling because of time, and my esteemed British colleague wants all of his. But what you're seeing is the cavalry show up. So this is a raid on an insurgent, a high-value target in Iraq. I think it might have been Afghanistan. I'm sorry, it's Afghanistan. You'll see the blue forces ingressing and knock on the door. They'll enter, and then what you're going to see is the guy pop out the back, because nobody covers down on the back of the building. But the Predator sees it, picks it up, follows it. Great work at the tactical end, right? So tactically speaking, we fused a couple capabilities. We used the remotely piloted aircraft's full motion video to cue the strike, and there goes the bad guy. He's going to run off. So as you're watching this, let me tell you how this happened, though. When those helicopters launched, they were going to a compound 30 miles away. 15-minute flight time. In that 15 minutes, we picked up another intelligence tipper, and we found out that we were wrong. The target is not where the helicopters are going. The target is at this other compound. If those helicopters hit the ground at the wrong compound, this guy goes underground, and we don't hear about him again for 6 months. All right? But the point is that the unmanned airplane, through being networked, saw the intelligence tipper come in on what we call the high side or top secret side. Well, he can't key the mic and just blast that out into Afghanistan. So in that 15-minute loop, he has the intelligence network declassify that down to a secret level where he can transmit it. And then the clock is ticking on both my brief and this video and this story. The helicopters are in flight, maybe 5 minutes out. He gets the helicopter pilot on the radio and says, divert, come to these coordinates instead. This is where the guy is. He puts the marker on the top of the building. You see the LTM? The helicopter pilot with his goggles sees the marker, goes right to the spot. They raid the right building, and we roll them up. That would not have happened without that network, that vulnerable network that I talked to you about. That's how we wage war with RPA, not drones. And that's how this thing is a portal to fuse the operational and tactical levels of warfare, and maybe even the strategic. Everybody remember that picture of the Obama administration, the entire cabinet, looking at a screen? You couldn't see what was on the screen. Well, we were taking down Osama bin Laden, right? The strategic level of war and command and control can be fused into the tactical level with all of its goodness and badness that comes along with it. Last thing, force multiplier. I'm going to be around for 20 hours, not the brief, and I got about 6 weapons and an MQ-9. So guess what that means? It's more important for me to stay here and become what's called an on-scene commander. It's not that important that I shoot. I want to make everybody else better at shooting. What I become now, and we're thinking about RPA, is a force multiplier. How do I make everybody else better? How do I make my endurance matter to the guys who don't have endurance? And let's talk about that real quick. First thing, Link 16 has been a big improvement for us. We now have threat awareness. That allows us to go places we couldn't go before. And then this is going to be a CSAR video that I think I'll run and talk to you while it's happening. You're going to hear a lot of things coming at you fast and furious in this video. This is a combat search and rescue exercise with real threats, real A-10s, real helicopters, real survivor on the ground, and real opposition forces coming out. What you're going to hear is the aircraft
that we are on station in contact and authenticated 11 Alpha. We are declaring on-scene commander. Stand by for further. We need ISO prep data. We need PLS data.
This guy's got a big mouth. So he's got the survivor, he's protecting the survivor, and now he's coordinating for a rescue.
Haas 11 Alpha.
Think about that portal ID. I think my audio crumped. That's fine. I'll just
Measure vehicles to
yeah, my audio
the Juliet.
It's fine.
Creep, 91.
I flew the mission. I know what happened. So think about this now. You've got an airplane over the top of the target that has got pristine comms with your national commander apparatus. It's able to protect the survivor. It's able to digitally secure, send a message to the A-10s who are waiting in arming on the ground, not burning gas or exposing themselves to threats. They're waiting for the whole picture to get downloaded to them. And then when they've got the picture figured out and we know where the survivor is, then they launch. Then the helicopters go. They come in, they rescue the guy real quick, and they get back out. This system enables us to do that where no other platform in our Air Force has that fused capability. So it's a force multiplier. It's a portal to all of your capabilities brought to the tactical end through the airplane. Unified Protector, I know some of you flew that. You got to engage with an MQ-1, and that airplane, even though there were only 2 of them, made a whole NATO strike platform package that much more effective. When I say 7 separate formations, we sent home Winchester before bingo, out of weapons before out of gas. 20 minutes of gas that you've got over the Gulf of Sidra, you need targets. You don't need to be looking for targets. Let me do that. That's kind of that on-scene commander force multiplier that I'm talking about. And that is where, and then what General Goldfein, the current airman running the fight, I'll never forget this quote he gave me. Somebody asked him, are you going to launch these things in a threat environment? And his response was, the last time I checked, these babies were fearless. And I remember in a training exercise, we got our airplane shot down, and the mission commander looked at me and goes, Squeeze, what do we do? I go, I'm going to lunch. What do you mean, what do we do? I mean, they're going to prep the spare, and I'm going to come back, and we're going to fly that later. And then it dawned on him, there's nothing to do. It's all right. Last slide. Last slide. This is where are we going in the future. And I won't tell you where these missions are, because that will make it a little dicey slide. But I will tell you that when our chief asked us, what are you going to do with these things? Now we've bought all of them and equipped all these guys and trained them. And what are you going to do when the fight's over? When Afghanistan rolls up, you're going to box them up, put them in cold storage like your mother's fur? No, I think we're going to fly them, Chief. And he said, well, I don't think so. You can prove it to me, though. So gratefully, he's a pretty open-minded guy, and he saw the point. We polled all of our combatant commanders around the globe. We said, what would you do if you had this capability? Finally, because it's going to become available. And they gave us a litany of things that we were not even prepared for. And the usual suspects are up top. They want ISR. They want that full motion video. But then some other things started to rise to the top that we never expected to see. They really liked the idea of airborne interdiction of maritime targets. Well, guess what? We stink at that. We don't have the equipment to do it. We don't know how to do it. So we've got some things to learn from you. How do we do that with an unmanned airplane, no less? Because a lot of our combatant commanders need that kind of support. But really the takeaway from this slide is it doesn't end with ISR. Our Air Force is changing. And we're realizing that in the next fight, when the horn goes off and they say send air, because air power is not dead, we need air power, okay? They're going to have a B-1 show up and they're going to have a couple of F-16 show up. But they're going to have some MQ-9 show up too. What do we do with these things? Is it just a matter of putting some Gucci video up on a big screen so the commander can feel more comfortable with his risk assessments? Or do I want that portal? Do I want that force multiplier to make everybody more effective, just like we did in Libya? That's where we're going. So that concludes my brief. I know there's no time for questions, but I think there's a question-answer period later. Marion, you need to update your slide with RPA, now that I've convinced you. All right, thank you very much.